He pretended to be poor to test true hearts, but only she loved him when he had nothing. Have you ever seen an entire life change because of a bold disguise and a gamble on genuine love? Well, that's exactly what happened in the wealthy region of the Hunter Valley, where appearance was valued more than essence, and every prominent grazing family wore masks they were reluctant to admit. On a warm September afternoon, a young property magnate named Ethan Caldwell decided to do something no wealthy elite had ever done: abandon his title, dress in a station hand's rags, and find out if anyone could love him for the man he was, not the fortune he possessed. That sunny morning, no one imagined that a wealthy landowner and a young woman rejected by her own family were about to meet, and that encounter would not only transform their destiny, but also expose the cruelty hidden behind the gates of respectable homesteads. While society judged by money and position, Ethan tried to understand if true love still existed in a world of self-interest. And Zara tried to survive by being invisible in her own home, mistreated by the family who should have loved her. But what neither of them knew was that the humble stockman's quarters would be precisely the beginning, the place where truth and lies would walk side by side until the heart revealed what truly mattered. And today, I'm going to tell you how this improbable meeting between a disguised magnate and a rejected soul changed everything forever. Before continuing with today's story, I want to say something very important. Welcome everyone to the Vintage Love and Romance channel. It makes me immensely happy to have you here, that you chose to listen to this story and accompany me through every chapter of this thrilling journey. I sincerely appreciate all the kindness, every affectionate comment, every like, and this very special company you offer me. Tell me in the comments from what corner of the world you are listening to this tale. I love imagining you there on the other side, in some special place, listening to this story calmly and feeling every emotion along with me. Your presence here means everything to me. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so now, so you don't miss any of our stories. The sun shone strongly over the Hunter Valley, illuminating the green paddocks surrounding the Blackwood property. The mid-afternoon silence was only interrupted by the birds singing and the distant sound of someone working the land. But that apparent peace hid secrets, cruelties, and an encounter that was about to happen and change lives forever. You planted everything wrong, Zara. Everything wrong. The shout of Penelope Blackwood sliced through the garden like a sharp knife. On the other side of the ivy-covered stone wall, a man stopped immediately upon hearing that furious voice. He was wearing simple, worn-out clothes, a beige linen shirt stained with dust, patched trousers, and old mud-covered boots. He had arrived a few minutes earlier by the dirt track and was about to knock on the gate when the screams made him hesitate. He leaned against the wall, hidden in the shadows of the trees, and peered through a crack between the stones. A woman, in an emerald green dress, furiously pointed at a young woman kneeling on the ground. "I told you to plant on the right side, not the left," Penelope shouted angrily, pointing at the freshly planted jasmine. "The Caldwell station owner is coming this afternoon. Everything must be perfect for Sky and Chloe to impress him." The young woman in the gray dress, hands dirty with soil and face bowed in submission, mumbled something inaudible. "Don't you ever think, Zara? Replant everything now and then, go to the kitchen to help the staff." The man behind the wall frowned. That woman was treating the young woman as if she were a mere servant, shouting at her mercilessly. What a cruel mistress, he thought with growing indignation. But then came the word that made him freeze. "Your sisters have been getting ready for hours," Penelope continued screaming. "Put on something decent later, not those servant clothes. If the magnate arrives and sees you like this, it will be an embarrassment to this family. Sisters?" The man clenched his fists tightly. His green eyes widened in shock. That mistreated young woman was not a servant, she was the daughter of the house. And that cruel woman was her mother, a mother treating her own daughter like a maid, publicly humiliating her without compassion. His heart sank with indignation and compassion for the young woman in the gray dress, who remained kneeling, accepting everything in silence. The man silently moved away from the wall and walked toward the property's main gate. He adjusted the cloth sack on his back, ran his hand through his messy hair, and took a deep breath. He knocked firmly on the wooden gate and called out with a grave, respectful voice, "Permission to speak with the owners of the house." Penelope abruptly turned at the sound of the voice, frowning with irritation. Zara also lifted her head, surprised by the interruption. "Who are you and what do you want here?" Penelope demanded coldly, evaluating the ragged stranger from top to bottom. The man bowed respectfully and kept his eyes lowered in a sign of submission. "Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Gus," he said humbly. "I've come from far away looking for honest work. I heard in the town that the Blackwood property is respectable, and I came to offer my services. Penelope crossed her arms over her chest, her face hardening even more. We don't have money to hire workers, she replied dryly, already ready to dismiss him. We can barely pay the few employees we still have. The man took a quick step forward, maintaining a humble but urgent tone. I'm not asking for money, ma'am. I'll work only for a roof over my head and food. Penelope hesitated, biting her lip as she assessed the man's broad shoulders and strong arms under the worn shirt. Before she could answer, Zara spoke softly beside her. Mother, Father has been complaining for weeks that he urgently needs someone to look after the horses. Their hooves need trimming before the magnate's visit this afternoon. Her voice was gentle and practical. Penelope looked at her daughter and then at the stranger, quickly calculating that if he cost no money and they needed help. Finally, she sighed impatiently. Very well. You'll have to speak with my husband Arthur first. He decides those things. She turned to Zara with a severe look. Take him to the study right now, to speak with your father. Zara opened the gate and motioned for him to enter. Come, Mr. Gus, she said quietly. They walked in silence through the garden and then down a corridor to a dark oak door. Zara knocked softly. Father, someone is here. Arthur's dry, impatient voice answered from inside. Enter. She opened the door, revealing a thin man about 60 years old, sitting behind a desk covered in papers. Arthur briefly looked up, not hiding his irritation at the interruption. What is it? He asked harshly, without greeting or courtesies. Zara kept her voice soft. This is Gus, Father. He's looking for work in exchange for a roof and food. Mother said he should speak with you, as we need someone to look after the horses. Arthur assessed the man for barely a few seconds with a cold, calculating look. Do you know how to look after horses? If you do, the job is yours, he asked directly, without mincing words. Yes, sir, the man replied. Arthur nodded distractedly, already returning his attention to the papers in front of him. Zara, bring me coffee now, he ordered, without looking at his daughter. Then show him the stockman's quarters at the back and explain the work. He briefly looked at the stranger with a hard expression. There is no money to pay, only a roof and food. If that suits you, start today. And with a brusque wave of his hand, he dismissed them without saying anything more, returning to reviewing accounts as if they no longer existed. Zara led the man out of the study in silence. First, she went to the kitchen to fetch the coffee her father had demanded, and quickly returned with a tray. She entered the study alone to serve him while he waited in the corridor. Moments later, she came out, closing the door softly, and motioned for him to follow her. They walked through the back of the property, passing fragrant orange groves until they reached the red wooden stables. The stockman's quarters are back there, she indicated, pointing. There's clean hay inside, and a water pump next to it. The horses are here in the stables. She hesitated for a moment, biting her lip. Welcome, Mr. Gus. Zara quickly returned to the house. The man stood still, watching her walk away. Then, he walked to the stockman's quarters and entered. It was spacious, with piles of golden hay in the corners and dark wooden beams on the ceiling. There was a small window that overlooked the back of the main house. He placed the sack in a corner, sat on the hay, and finally allowed his shoulders to relax. He closed his eyes for a long moment, thinking about everything he had just witnessed, the cruelty of that mother, the coldness of that father, the silent kindness of the young Zara. Then he took a deep breath because it was time to remember who he really was. His name was not Gus. It was Ethan Caldwell, owner of the Caldwell Group Holdings, lord of vast land holdings, and one of the richest and most powerful men in the entire region. He was 28 years old and tired, deeply tired of the self-interested society women who only saw his wealth and position, and of the parents who sold their daughters like merchandise at silent auctions. His mother, Mrs. Eleanor, had been pleading with him for years to get married, but every formal visit to a property was the same empty farce. Women made up like dolls, flattering fathers, conversations about possessions and lineage. None saw the real man behind the enormous wealth. Then, Ethan had a bold idea: to visit those families disguised as a poor laborer before the official visits to see their true faces. His mother thought he was crazy but ended up accepting. She, too, was fed up with empty and greedy socialites. Ethan had scheduled official visits as the property owner to several estates in the following weeks, and the Blackwood family was the first. But before the formal visit, he would arrive days earlier disguised as Gus, to observe who they really were when they weren't pretending to impress a rich magnate. That afternoon, the families would receive a message. The owner of Caldwell Holdings was indisposed with a sudden fever and could not attend the scheduled visit for that afternoon. He wanted to observe the Blackwoods without masks, and what he had seen so far already revealed a lot. Cruelty, falsehood, and a kind young woman mistreated by her own family. Zara returned to the main homestead with hurried steps, feeling the weight of her mother's gaze on her from a distance. She went straight to the garden and knelt on the ground again, replanting every jasmine sprout exactly on the right side, as Penelope had demanded. Her hands worked quickly and precisely, automatic movements of someone who had spent her whole life obeying orders without questioning. The afternoon sun beat down on her back through the thin fabric of the gray dress, and sweat began to form in small drops on her forehead. When she finally finished, she wiped her hands on the soil-stained apron and stood up with a tired sigh. She looked at the perfectly aligned jasmines and felt a pang of sadness. Not even the flowers could grow where she wanted in that house. She entered through the side door and climbed the creaking stairs to the small attic room she occupied, far from her sister's spacious rooms. The room was simple and narrow, with a narrow bed covered by a faded blanket, an old chest of drawers with a cracked mirror, and a small window that barely let in any light. On the bed were 2 dresses, the scraps that Sky and Chloe had discarded years ago when the fashion changed. One was a faded brown with yellow stains under the arms that never completely disappeared. The other was moss green with a frayed hem and visible patches on the bodice. Zara took the brown dress, the least worst of the 2. Then she took a quick bath and began to dress slowly. In reality, she preferred it this way. Old dresses, dark corners, invisibility. Better that than being in the center of everything, constantly observed and judged. As she adjusted the worn dress over her thin body, Zara looked at herself in the cracked mirror and saw the reflection she knew too well. Dull brown hair, pulled back in a simple braid, pale skin without color, tired eyes of someone who slept little and worked hard. She didn't have the striking beauty of Sky with her blonde curls, nor the calculated elegance of Chloe with her dark, piercing eyes. Zara was common, subdued, forgettable, and she knew exactly why. Her mother, Penelope, had almost died in childbirth, bringing her into the world 19 years ago. The pregnancy had been complicated from the start, and when the moment finally came, Penelope bled so much that the doctors thought she wouldn't survive. But she survived and never forgave her daughter for almost killing her. That silent hatred permeated every look, every harsh word, every cold command. Zara was the youngest of Arthur and Penelope Blackwood's 4 children. Sky, the eldest at 24, was vain and ambitious, dreaming of balls and wealthy husbands since childhood. Darcy, the only son at 22, was arrogant and lazy, wasting the family's money on gambling and drinks while pretending to help his father in the business. Chloe, 20, was perhaps the cruelest of all, with a sharp tongue and a pleasure in humiliating the weaker. And then there was Zara, the unwanted, the one who almost killed her mother, the one who had no place at the table of important conversations. She cooked, ironed, cleaned, tended the garden, did everything the servants couldn't manage, and she knew perfectly the hatred her mother felt for her. It was written in every icy gaze, in every harsh order. Her father, Arthur, was no better. He had drowned in debt over the last 5 years, making bad investments in unproductive land and loans with crippling interest. Now desperate and too proud to admit the imminent bankruptcy, he had a single salvation plan: marry Sky or Chloe to some rich property owner who would pay all the debts in exchange for a beautiful, well-born wife. Zara never entered into those plans. She was invisible in the family's matrimonial strategies, and, honestly, she preferred it that way. The idea of being sold like cattle to a stranger terrified her more than loneliness. She finished getting ready, pulled her hair into a tight braid, and went down the stairs back to the ground floor, where she knew the family was already preparing in the lounge room. When she entered the spacious room, decorated with antique furniture and heavy, faded red velvet curtains, Sky and Chloe were already there, dazzling in their new dresses. Sky wore a sky blue silk dress with gold embroidery on the bodice, the generous neckline exposing her white shoulders, and her blonde hair arranged in elaborate curls held with pearl combs. Chloe was equally splendid, in an intense pink dress with puffed sleeves and a voluminous skirt held by frames, her black hair loose in dramatic waves over her shoulders. When Zara entered in her faded, worn brown dress, the 2 sisters looked her up and down and burst into cruel, shrill laughter. "Look at that, Chloe," Sky pointed at Zara with her ivory fan. "Our little sister is all dressed up to receive the magnate." Chloe covered her mouth with a gloved hand, pretending to hide malicious laughter. "What a charming dress, Zara. What vintage would that be? 1870? She turned to Sky with a poisonous smile. Do you think the magnate will notice her with that greasy hair and that servant's dress? Sky shook her head dramatically. Impossible. Never would a real man, much less the Caldwell owner, look at someone like that. Not with that drowned rat look. The two laughed loudly, and Zara lowered her eyes, feeling her cheeks burn with humiliation. She was used to it, but it still hurt. She sat in a discreet corner of the room, in the shadows near the bookshelf, where she always stayed during important visits, present, but invisible like an unimportant piece of furniture. Penelope entered shortly after, adjusting her own emerald green dress, and didn't even look at Zara. The family waited in the room for hours, tense and expectant, with Arthur pacing back and forth, checking his pocket watch every 5 minutes. The air was thick with anxiety and an overly intense perfume, but the magnate did not arrive. When the sun began to set and the golden afternoon light gave way to violet twilight, the sound of horse hooves was finally heard at the entrance. Arthur rushed to the window, but his face fell when he saw it was not a luxury 4WD, but only a messenger in blue and silver livery. The man delivered a sealed envelope and quickly departed. Arthur opened the letter with trembling hands and read aloud with a voice laden with increasing frustration. His Excellency, Ethan Caldwell, of Caldwell Group Holdings, regrets to inform you that he is indisposed due to a sudden fever and will not be able to attend the scheduled visit today. He will send a new communication shortly. The silence that followed was deafening and heavy as molten lead. Then, Arthur exploded, crumpling the letter forcefully and throwing it to the floor. Damn it, we're ruined. He ran his hands through his gray hair, eyes wide with panic. The creditors will come next week demanding payment. We don't have even half of it. This was our only chance. Penelope visibly paled, bringing her hand to her chest as if she couldn't breathe. Arthur, he will come on another date. He surely will. He's just sick. It's temporary. Sky began to cry dramatically, tears of rage running and ruining her carefully applied makeup. I spent hours getting ready. We spent a fortune on these dresses. How dare he not show up? Chloe squeezed her fan so tightly that the ribs creaked. He surely found out we're ruined and invented that ridiculous excuse. The chaos of altered voices filled the room. Arthur finally turned to Zara, who remained still in the corner, almost forgotten by everyone. You go to the kitchen and prepare dinner immediately, he ordered harshly. Zara quickly stood up, making a small curtsy. Yes, father. She was leaving when Penelope called her with a voice cold as ice. Zara, wait. The young woman stopped at the door and turned around. Take a loaf of bread to that man in the quarters. Just a dry loaf for him. Nothing more. He should be grateful to have that. Zara hesitated, frowning slightly. But mother, we promised him proper food in exchange for his work. Penelope interrupted her with a scathing look. Take a loaf, and that's final. He should be grateful to have a roof over his head. Now go. Zara nodded silently and left the room with a heavy heart. What none of them knew was that Ethan was on the other side of the lounge room window. At that very moment, hidden in the shadows of the side wall, he had heard every word, the shouts about the debts, Arthur's desperation, Penelope's cruel order to give him only bread. Ethan clenched his fists with contained rage upon hearing how that family spoke of him as if he were less than a dog. But what impressed him most was Zara's soft voice, trying to defend the agreement, reminding her mother of the promise made. When he heard the steps moving away inside the house, Ethan silently retreated and returned to the stockman's quarters with quick steps, his heart pounding. He needed to get there before anyone noticed his absence. He entered the quarters and went straight to the attached stables, where he began to care for the neglected horses. There were 9 in total, 5 mares, 3 stallions, and a young foal. All were too thin, with ribs visible under their dull coats, and hooves cracked from lack of care. But they were purebred animals, beautiful under the layer of dirt and abandonment. Ethan had 50 horses on his own property. He called each of them as if they were family. Seeing those 9 noble animals treated with such negligence deeply angered him. What a waste, he murmured as he gently brushed the tangled mane of a gray mare that looked at him with sad, distrustful eyes. They deserve much more than this. He worked with care and affection, cleaning, feeding, and speaking softly to each animal, as he always did. Night fell completely, and the full moon illuminated the quarters through the small window when Ethan finally heard soft steps approaching. The wooden door slowly opened, and Zara entered, carrying a tray covered with a clean cloth. She wore the same worn brown dress, but now her clean brown hair was loose, falling in natural waves over her shoulders and back to her waist. The soft light of the oil lamp she carried illuminated her delicate face, and for the first time, Ethan truly noticed her hidden beauty. It was not the striking, artificial beauty of her sisters, but something deeper and more genuine. Her amber-colored eyes shone with kindness, and there was a natural grace in her movements, even dressed in rags. Ethan felt something move in his chest, something he hadn't felt for a long time. Zara placed the tray on a wooden box and removed the cloth, revealing not a dry, miserable loaf, but an abundant and generous plate. Still steaming roast meat, golden potatoes, cooked carrots, a large piece of fresh bread, and even a jug of clean water. The aroma was wonderful. Ethan looked at the plate and then at her, surprised. "Miss Zara," he began. She sat on a nearby pile of hay, arranging the worn skirt around her legs. "I'll wait until you finish eating to take the plate back, Mr. Gus," she said softly. "I don't want my mother to see that I brought more than she ordered." Ethan hesitated, then took the plate and also sat down. "I overheard the conversation in the room by accident," he admitted quietly. "Your mother asked that you only bring dry bread." Zara offered a small, sad smile, but her eyes remained kind. "Don't worry, Mr. Gus. I will always bring you proper food while you are working here. It is only fair." She looked at her own calloused hands, resting on her lap. "Please excuse the things my parents say. They are under a lot of pressure due to debts and financial problems. It's not an excuse for cruelty, I know, but it's their reality." There was a surprising maturity in her voice, a deep understanding of human nature that did not match her youth. Ethan watched her as he ate slowly, studying every detail of her face in the soft lamplight. And at that moment, there in the humble stockman's quarters surrounded by the smell of hay and horses, he began to think something he hadn't dared to think in years. Perhaps, just perhaps, that young woman was different from all the others. That night, Arthur was in the study with Penelope. She still wore the emerald green dress from the day, but now her slumped shoulders betrayed her tiredness and frustration. "We need to talk, Arthur," she said with a tense voice, sitting in the armchair opposite the desk. "The magnate cancelled. We don't know when he'll come, and Barry O'Connell is demanding payment by next week." Arthur ran his hands over his tired face, his eyes red from calculating impossible figures on the papers scattered in front of him. "I don't have any more money, Penelope," he murmured, his voice broken with desperation. "Barry O'Connell is not a man to wait. He has already sent 3 notices. If we don't pay next week, he'll take everything he wants, and there will be reprisals." Penelope pressed her lips into a thin line, her face hardening. "That coarse, fat, drunken old man," she spat venomously. "Why did you borrow money from him, Arthur? Of all the creditors in the region, it had to be Barry O'Connell. You know very well he gives no quarter when someone owes him. He's ruthless." Arthur slammed his fist against the table, making the lamp tremble. "I had no choice. No bank wanted to lend us any more. He was the only one who accepted, and now we are trapped." A heavy silence filled the study for long moments, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Arthur stared at the impossible accounts, his brow furrowed in painful concentration. Then, he slowly looked up at his wife with an expression that mixed desperation and cold calculation. "I was thinking, you know," he began hesitantly, in a low voice, of offering one of the girls. Penelope opened her eyes, immediately understanding what he suggested. "To Barry O'Connell?" she asked incredulously, her voice rising an octave. "Have you gone mad, Arthur? I won't marry my daughters to that repulsive man. He drinks like a fish and treats women like property. They deserve young, rich socialites, not that disgusting pig." Arthur leaned forward, his hard eyes shining with desperate determination. "What about Zara?" The question fell like a stone into the silence of the study. Penelope froze, her mouth slightly open. "Zara." She repeated the name slowly, sounding strange on her lips. Arthur nodded, gesticulating with his hands. "Think about it, Penelope. Zara wouldn't object. She never objects to anything. We decide, and she obeys, as she always has. The debt is too high, and O'Connell would surely accept the hand of a Blackwood in marriage as payment. He always looked at our daughters with interest. His voice carried disgust, but also a brutal pragmatism. Penelope remained silent, processing the horrible proposal. Then, slowly, a cruel smile began to form on her painted lips. "It's true," she murmured thoughtfully, the smile growing. "It might be a good idea. In reality, Zara is young, healthy, and would adequately fulfill the role of a wife. Barry O'Connell would be satisfied, and our debt would be forgiven." She looked at her husband with eyes shining with cold, calculated relief. "And then Sky and Chloe would be free to marry the magnate or other appropriate wealthy men when the opportunity arises." Arthur nodded vigorously, clearly relieved that she agreed. Exactly what I thought. It's the perfect solution. Penelope raised a hesitant hand. But let's wait for now. We don't need to make this decision today. We still have a few days. If the magnate confirms a new visit before the deadline, maybe we'll find another solution. But if not, she left the sentence hanging ominously. Arthur nodded gravely, understanding perfectly. If not, we will offer Zara to Barry O'Connell. The next day dawned clear and warm, with the rising sun painting the sky in golden and pink tones. Ethan woke up early in the stockman's quarters with the birds singing and the gentle whinnies of the horses in the stables. He stretched out on the hay, feeling his muscles slightly sore from the previous day's work. But it was a good, satisfying pain. Upon sitting up, he noticed something that wasn't there the night before. A small, improvised table made with wooden crates, and on it, carefully covered with a clean cloth, a steaming earthenware mug of hot coffee and a generous slice of fresh bread accompanied by yellow cheese. His heart instantly warmed. Zara must have come before dawn, while he slept, to leave that simple but thoughtful breakfast. Ethan got up, washed his face with the freezing water from the outdoor pump, and drank the coffee with genuine gratitude. The taste was simple but honest, and it meant more to him than any elaborate banquet in his own grand Caldwell homestead. After eating, he began to work with renewed energy. He spent the entire morning reorganizing the stockman's quarters, cleaning every corner, sweeping the packed dirt floor, fixing a loose roof beam, tidying the rusty tools scattered in a corner. Then he went to the stables and worked in the stalls, removing all the dirty straw and replacing it with fresh hay, fixing the creaking wooden doors, checking every detail with the meticulous care of someone who truly cares. Around noon, he led the 9 horses to the green paddock at the back of the property, observing with satisfaction how they ran free for the first time in a long while. Throughout all that intense work, Ethan discreetly observed the main house in the distance, and what he saw impressed and outraged him more and more. Zara did not stop for a single minute throughout the morning. He saw her leave the kitchen door carrying heavy buckets of water, then sweeping the entire front veranda, then shaking huge rugs that raised clouds of dust in the hot air. She ran back and forth, attending to invisible calls, always in that worn gray dress, always with the slightly hunched posture of someone carrying too much weight on young shoulders. Meanwhile, her sisters, Sky and Chloe, only appeared on the veranda once, laughing loudly, dressed in light, colorful clothes, lazily fanning themselves before returning to the cool interior of the house. The difference in treatment was shocking and revolting. That afternoon, when the sun began to decline on the horizon, staining everything orange and gold, Ethan was watering the horses when he saw Zara descend the steep path leading to the creek at the back of the property. She was carrying an enormous wicker basket overflowing with dirty laundry sheets, dresses, shirts, towels that must have weighed almost as much as she did. The basket was so heavy that she had to stop every few steps to rest her trembling arms. Ethan watched her disappear among the trees lining the creek, and something inside him, a mix of curiosity, concern, and a growing interest he couldn't deny, prompted him to follow her discreetly. He left the horses grazing peacefully and walked silently down the same path, maintaining a safe distance so as not to be noticed. The creek was a beautiful, isolated spot, surrounded by weeping willows whose branches hung like green curtains over the crystal-clear water running softly over smooth stones. Ethan stopped behind a wide trunk, hidden in the shadows, and observed. Zara had left the heavy basket on the bank and was now looking around carefully, checking that she was truly alone. Apparently satisfied with the privacy, she began to undress slowly, taking off her worn gray dress. Ethan, out of respect, turned his back and sat behind a tree. He knew he should leave, that he was invading a private moment, but his feet seemed nailed to the ground, and he decided to wait for her to come out. He kept his eyes respectfully averted, looking at the trees, the sky, anywhere but directly at her. But he was aware of every sound, the soft splashing of the water, her sigh of relief as she washed away the sweat and dirt of the whole day, the low murmur of a song she was humming softly while bathing. There was something deeply moving in that simple scene. A young woman stealing a few minutes of peace and cleanliness in the midst of an endless, exhausting day of work. After a few minutes that seemed like hours, Ethan heard the sounds of her getting out of the water, the rustle of clothes as she got dressed again, and he waited patiently, giving her time to fully recompose herself. When he judged enough time had passed, Ethan took a deep breath and deliberately advanced down the path, making noise with heavy steps on the dry leaves to announce his arrival. As he came around the curve between the trees, Zara was already fully dressed again in the gray dress, her wet hair pulled back in a loose braid, and she was kneeling on the creek bank, vigorously rubbing a white sheet against a smooth, soap-covered stone. She looked up, startled upon hearing the steps, and her eyes widened when she saw him. "Mr. Gus," she exclaimed, bringing a wet hand to her chest. "I didn't hear you arrive. Do you need something?" Ethan approached slowly, maintaining a respectful and humble posture. "Forgive me for startling you, Miss Zara. I saw you come down with that heavy basket and thought I'd offer to help carry it back." Zara looked at the enormous basket, still full of wet laundry waiting to be hung, and smiled tiredly, but sincerely. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Gus, but I don't want to take up your time. I'm sure you have a lot of work with the horses." Ethan shook his head, sitting on a large nearby stone and maintaining a respectful distance. "The horses are grazing peacefully. I have plenty of time." He watched her return to work, rubbing the clothes with surprising strength for someone so thin. "May I ask, do you always do all this work alone?" Zara rinsed the sheet in the running water, wrung it out with expert hands, and placed it in the clean laundry basket beside her. "Yes, I've always done it, since I was a child, actually." Her voice was neutral, without self-pity. "It's my role in the family, I suppose. Everyone has their role." Ethan watched her work, noticing the efficient, automatic movements of someone who has done this 1,000 times. The calloused but surprisingly delicate hands. "Where are you from, Mr. Gus?" she suddenly asked, picking up another garment. "Have you always lived around here in the region?" He hesitated only a fraction of a second, choosing his words carefully not to lie more than absolutely necessary. "I've always lived around here, yes. Moving from place to place, working where there was an opportunity." He preferred to keep the details vague, avoiding inventing an elaborate story that might contradict itself later. The fewer direct lies he told her, the better he felt. "And you," he returned the question, "have you always lived here on this property?" Zara nodded, a melancholic smile briefly appearing on her lips. "I was born in this house and rarely leave it, actually." They talked a little more while she finished washing the heavy laundry. Ethan asked simple questions, and she answered with disarming honesty, talking about her lonely childhood, how she learned to cook with the old housekeeper who died years ago, and her love for the old books in the library that no one else read. She asked about the places he had been, and Ethan responded with carefully edited truths, talking about the landscapes he had seen and the people he had met, but always omitting his true identity. When she finally finished all the washing, the basket overflowed with heavy, wet laundry. Ethan immediately stood up. "Let me carry that for you." Before she could protest, he took the basket with ease, balancing it on his strong shoulders as if it weighed next to nothing. They returned together along the narrow path toward the house, the long afternoon shadows enveloping them like soft arms. Zara talked about the plants growing along the way, pointing out wildflowers and herbs she collected for medicinal infusions. Ethan listened intently, fascinated not so much by the information as by the way she spoke with genuine passion, with a knowledge acquired through patient observation of nature. There was a natural intelligence in her that no formal education could teach, a wisdom born of solitude and contemplation. Upon reaching the back of the house, Ethan placed the heavy basket on the ground, next to the clothesline rope stretched between two trees. Zara looked at him with sincere gratitude shining in her amber eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Gus. You've been very kind." He smiled, and it was a genuine smile that illuminated his face. "The pleasure was mine, Miss Zara. Thank you for the conversation." And as he returned to the stockman's quarters, Ethan understood with crystal clarity that something was changing within him, something dangerous, something wonderful, something he couldn't control even if he tried. As the days passed, the routine on the Blackwood property settled into a predictable rhythm. Zara continued her endless tasks. She woke up before sunrise to prepare the family's coffee. She spent the day cooking, washing, cleaning, and tending the garden. Ethan worked in the stables, caring for the 9 horses with a dedication that surprised even himself. He cleaned the stalls, repaired fences, organized tools, and spent hours speaking softly to the animals. He made friends with the other employees and listened to constant complaints about the employers. The mornings were hot and the afternoons suffocating, but the physical work was strangely comforting. He found himself anxious for the arrival of the night, when Zara would come to the quarters with food and they would talk about everything. Every night, without exception, Zara arrived, carrying not the dry bread. Penelope ordered but generous plates with meat, vegetables, and fresh bread. They sat on the hay under the faint lamplight and talked for hours. She spoke of the books she read secretly, her dreams of seeing the sea, and the secret flowers she planted. Ethan spoke of horses, travels, and landscapes, always carefully editing his stories to omit his true identity. Those conversations became the most valuable time of the day for Ethan, more precious than any gold in his coffers. There was something about her, a genuine kindness, a silent wisdom that fascinated him more and more deeply. One suffocatingly hot afternoon, Ethan was checking the mare's hooves when he heard heavy steps approaching. Arthur Blackwood entered the stable with his arms crossed, observing the horses with cold, calculating eyes. Ethan bowed respectfully. "Good afternoon, Mr. Blackwood." Arthur walked slowly, inspecting everything: the clean stalls, the healthier horses, the repaired fence. After a long silence, he nodded with absolute dryness. "You work well," he admitted, with extreme reluctance. "The horses are better." His voice was hard as stone, without the slightest trace of gratitude. Ethan seized the rare opening to say what he needed to. "Thank you, sir, but the horses urgently need a better feed ration than they are currently receiving." He pointed to the animals. "What they eat is insufficient. They are still very thin. With a proper ration and some supplements, they would regain ideal weight in a few weeks." Arthur turned abruptly, his expression changing from neutral to irritated in an instant. "A better ration costs money we don't have," he said harshly. "They have enough food already. Do your job and stick to what concerns you." The abruptness was defensive, typical of someone who knows they are wrong but cannot admit it due to wounded pride. Ethan maintained a humble tone despite the frustration rising in his throat. "Sir, I know people in the region who sell excellent feed at a fair price. I can speak with them on your behalf, perhaps negotiate a good deal." Arthur took a threatening step forward, his face reddening with rage. "I told you not to interfere." He cut him off, his voice rising several octaves. "You are just a miserable laborer who barely has a place to die. I don't need advice from a vagrant on how to manage my property." He pointed to the pile of manure in the corner. "Now go clean the horse droppings and stop giving opinions above your station." The humiliation in his voice was intentional and cruel. Ethan clenched his jaw tightly, his fists clenching as he fought to control the rage boiling in his veins. He managed to keep his voice neutral with immense effort. "Yes, sir, as you wish." Arthur turned and left with heavy steps, slamming the door, which startled the horses. Ethan stood still, breathing deeply, fighting the urge to shout the truth in the face of that arrogant man. He sighed deeply, running his hand through his longer hair that he had let grow for the disguise. He had a great desire to reveal who he was, buy all those horses, and take them out of that miserable property. But he couldn't. Not yet. He needed to maintain the disguise and truly know Zara's heart first, because she was a hope in that world that only thought about money. Days later, on an even more suffocating afternoon, Ethan was working, combing a mare's mane. The heat was so intense that he had completely opened his shirt, leaving his tan chest exposed to the air. Sweat ran down his forehead and neck as he worked, murmuring soft words to the animal. He was so concentrated that he didn't notice when someone entered the stable silently. "Hello." A soft but suggestive female voice broke his concentration. "I see the gentleman is very hot, aren't you?" Ethan turned, surprised, quickly closing his shirt. It was Chloe, Zara's middle sister, standing in the entrance in a pink dress with a generous neckline. It was the first time she had been there. Chloe leaned lazily against the doorframe, her dark eyes tracing his body without the slightest modesty or disguise. Ethan finished buttoning his shirt, recomposing his respectful posture. "Good afternoon, miss. Can I help you with anything?" Chloe entered slowly with calculated steps, her eyes never leaving his face. She tilted her head, studying him with an unsettling intensity. "You know, I have the impression I've seen you somewhere before," she said slowly. "Your face seems familiar. Are you sure we've never met?" Ethan's heart skipped a beat, but he maintained the neutral expression of a simple worker. "I don't think so, miss," he replied calmly. "We certainly don't frequent the same places or social circles." Chloe laughed, a high, artificial sound that echoed unpleasantly in the stable. "That's true," she agreed, taking a few more steps toward him. "You're a man with nothing, aren't you? No property, no money, no social standing whatsoever." She stopped very close, so close he could smell the strong, cloying perfume she wore. Then her eyes brazenly traced him once more from head to toe. "However, you are very handsome," she said in a lower voice. "Very handsome, indeed. Too bad you have no money at all." She extended her hand and lightly touched his exposed arm, her fingers following the contour of the muscles with inappropriate familiarity. "A real shame," she repeated with a calculated smile. Then she moved away slowly. "Continue your work, Gus." Chloe turned one last time at the door to look at him with that enigmatic smile before disappearing into the sunlight. Ethan let out the breath he hadn't even realized he was holding, feeling a cold sweat run down his back despite the heat. That had been extremely dangerous. He ran his hand over his hair and the beard he had let grow considerably in recent weeks. He normally wore his hair short and his face cleanly shaved, following the elite fashion. But he had let both grow so the disguise would work perfectly. Chloe had been too malicious and observant. Her eyes were too sharp. Her memory too good. She could have recognized him if she looked more closely. He would have to be even more careful from now on. Ethan had arranged with Mick, his foreman, but also a childhood friend, that every Tuesday at 3 p.m. they would meet at an isolated point on the track parallel to the property. There, away from curious eyes, Mick would bring him anything Ethan needed. Clean clothes, letters from his mother, reports on his businesses, tools. It was the only thread that kept Ethan connected to his real life while he lived that lie. After the encounter with Chloe, which had left him nervous, Ethan greeted Mick and gave him specific instructions. "Tomorrow, I need you to come at dawn," he said in a low voice. "Bring my personal horse care tools and several bags of the premium feed I use with my horses. The ones here are starving, and Arthur refuses to buy adequate feed." Mick, a sturdy man of 40 with gray hair and kind eyes, frowned with concern. "Ethan, what if someone asks where those expensive things came from? How are you going to explain specialized tools and imported feed in the hands of a poor laborer?" Ethan smiled slightly. "They don't pay attention to those things, Mick." Mick shook his head, not entirely convinced it was a good idea, but he had known Ethan since he was a child and knew there was no way to dissuade him. "All right, I'll bring it at dawn before sunrise." He hesitated for an instant. Then he put his hand on Ethan's shoulder with the familiarity of decades of friendship. "But please, be very careful, Mate. This idea of disguising yourself is risky. If they find out who you really are, and I sincerely hope it's worth it." He left the sentence hanging, laden with meaning. Ethan smiled and said, "Rest easy, old mate. It's proving to be very worthwhile." In the following dawn, when everyone was deeply asleep, Ethan waited hidden near the back fence. The air was cold and damp, loaded with the smell of wet earth. Exactly at 3 a.m., he heard the sound of wheels on the dirt of the parallel track. Mick's silhouette appeared among the shadows, driving a small cart pulled by a black horse. They worked in absolute silence, loading 6 enormous bags of premium feed and specialized tools into the stockman's quarters. When Mick departed, Ethan prepared generous portions of the new feed for each of the 9 hungry horses. The horses' reaction was immediate and moving when they received the food in the wooden troughs. They approached with a heartbreaking urgency, eating with a ferocious, happy appetite. Their tails moved contentedly, their ears relaxed, and small sounds of satisfaction came from their throats. Ethan stayed, watching them for long minutes, feeling a deep satisfaction that no stately banquet had ever provided him. He gently touched the neck of one of the mares, who looked at him with large eyes full of silent gratitude. Over the next few days, Ethan dedicated his afternoons to a personal project he had been planning silently for some time. He had always loved working with wood since he was a child, using simple tools and pieces of oak. He began to carve a small but elaborate panel, working in the quiet hours of the afternoon. Little by little, the image took shape under his hands. The immense sea with delicately sculpted waves, the distant horizon where the water met the sky, and a magnificent sun with carved rays radiating light. He worked on that gift for 3 entire days, polishing every detail until it was perfect. When night finally fell, Ethan waited, sitting with the gift hidden behind him. Soon he heard the soft steps he already recognized. It was her. Zara entered, carrying the tray, her hair loose, falling in waves over her shoulders. "Good evening, Gus," she said softly. "Tonight I brought beef stew." Ethan stood up nervously. "Before eating, I made something for you." He approached and handed her the cloth wrapping. Zara slowly unwrapped it, and when the cloth fell, revealing the carved wooden panel, she froze completely. Her eyes scanned every sculpted detail, the delicate waves, the radiant sun, the tiny birds. It's the beach," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, her fingers trembling. "The sea is exactly as I imagined it in my dreams." Tears began to fill her, amber eyes shining in the golden lamplight. Ethan took a step closer. "You told me your greatest dream was to see the sea," he said softly. "Since I can't take you there now, I decided to bring the sea to you, Zara." The tears overflowed and ran down Zara's cheeks, but they were tears of genuine joy that illuminated her whole face. No one has ever done anything like this for me," she confessed, pressing the panel against her chest. "No one has ever given me a gift in my whole life." Ethan didn't think. He simply acted. He raised his hand and gently wiped away a tear with his thumb. The contact was light, but sent an electric current through both of them that left them frozen in place. Zara raised her own hand and covered his, pressing his palm against her warm cheek. Their gazes met and locked, deep green meeting golden amber, and the world around them ceased to exist. There was no longer the stockman's quarters, no longer the lamp. There was only the two of them, and the space between their bodies. The air, heavy with something invisible yet palpable, vibrated between them like violin strings. They remained like that for precious seconds that seemed like hours, touching with an intimacy deeper than any kiss. "Thank you, Gus," Zara finally whispered. "Please, just call me Gus, without the mister." "We're friends, aren't we?" he asked. Zara nodded, still hugging the panel to her chest, smiling with pure happiness. "Friends," she repeated, testing the word, savoring it. They stayed there for a few precious moments, neither wanting to break that magical bubble. "I need to go back," she said reluctantly, taking a step back. "If my mother notices I've taken too long." Ethan nodded sympathetically, although everything in him screamed to ask her to stay. Zara walked toward the door, turning several times to look at him, holding the panel as if it were pure gold. Ethan remained still for long minutes after she left, his heart pounding, his skin tingling where she had touched him. An absolute certainty grew within him, like a tree setting deep roots. It was her, without a shadow of a doubt, without hesitation. It was Zara, the one he had been looking for years. It was her, the one his heart recognized as his. Zara rushed back to the house, climbed the stairs, and entered her small attic room. She lit a candle and sat on the bed, holding the panel between her hands, examining every carved detail. The familiar sadness began to surface when she thought about her life unwanted since birth, tolerated only out of obligation. Her mother looked at her with ill-concealed hatred, blaming her for nearly dying in childbirth. Her father ignored her as if she were an unimportant piece of furniture. Zara acted strong, but the constant rejection hurt deeply. That gift from Gus represented so much more. It represented being seen, being remembered, being important. She was developing deep feelings for that kind man who always helped her, who talked to her, who had made a gift especially for her. The next morning, the door to the small room burst open violently, hitting the wall. Chloe and Sky entered with arrogant steps. "Wake up, sleepyhead," Sky shouted. "We're hungry, and breakfast won't make itself." Chloe noticed the wooden panel leaning against the wall, took it without permission, and examined it with contempt. "What a ridiculous thing is this? Who gave you this junk?" Zara jumped out of bed. "Give it back, please." It was a gift. Chloe lifted the panel out of her reach, laughing cruelly. "From whom?" Zara hesitated. "It was Gus. He made it for me." Chloe burst into loud, cruel laughter. "Little sister is having a romance with the poor outsider. Dad won't be happy at all when he finds out." Zara felt tears stinging, but she forced her voice to be firm. "Leave me alone, Chloe. Give me back my gift." Sky took a threatening step. "Watch how you talk to your sister. You need a lesson." Before Zara could react, Sky snatched the panel and threw it forcefully against the floor. The dry crunch of the wood breaking resonated horribly. The panel shattered into several pieces. "No." Zara fell to her knees, gathering the broken fragments, crying desperately. Chloe watched with cruel satisfaction. "This is so you learn your place, you useless thing." Ethan had sent a discreet note to his mother through Mick at their last Tuesday meeting. The words were simple, but laden with meaning. "Mother, I have found the right woman. I will bring her to meet you soon. Mrs. Eleanor would undoubtedly be anxious, happy, and curious to meet the mysterious young woman who had finally conquered her son's heart. But Ethan now faced an agonizing dilemma that kept him awake in the cold nights of the stockman's quarters. How could he talk to Zara about his true feelings, about his true identity, without her family discovering everything before the right moment? He needed to undo the elaborate disguise, but the timing and the manner had to be perfect so as not to ruin everything. That specific afternoon of blue sky and intense sun, Ethan took the 9 horses to the green pasture that stretched across the back of the property. The animals ran freely through the tall grass, their coats shining healthily under the golden light, a direct result of the premium feed they had been secretly receiving for days. Ethan sat under the cool shade of an old gum tree, watching the horses graze peacefully, while his mind worked tirelessly. He needed to make a final decision soon. He couldn't continue that charade indefinitely. Zara deserved to know the truth. She deserved an honest proposal, not disguises or lies. But how to reveal everything without scaring her or making her believe that everything had been a cruel manipulation from the start? While Ethan meditated under the tree, completely unaware of what was happening in the main house, Penelope entered Zara's small, narrow attic room. The young woman was sitting on the bed mending an old sheet when her mother appeared at the door with a strangely neutral expression. "Zara, take a proper bath and put on your least worn dress," Penelope ordered with a cold but controlled voice. "Then, come down to the study immediately. Your father wants to talk to you about an important family matter." Zara looked at her mother in surprise. She was rarely summoned for conversations in the study. That was territory reserved for serious matters that usually did not include her. "Yes, mother," she replied in a low voice, while a strange knot of apprehension began to form in her stomach without her knowing exactly why. Zara obeyed mechanically, washed herself in the cold water basin, combed her brown hair into a simple braid, and put on her brown dress, the least worn she possessed. She descended the creaking stairs with slow steps, her heart beating faster and faster, with an inexplicable anxiety that grew with every step. She stopped in front of the heavy oak door of the study, took a deep breath, and knocked softly. "Come in," Arthur's harsh voice responded from within. Zara opened the door slowly and entered the atmosphere of bookshelves filled with dusty tomes. What she saw made her freeze immediately at the entrance. Sitting in a worn leather armchair was a fat man about 60 years old with a prominent belly, a gray mustache stained yellow, and a strong smell of cheap cigarette smoke and stale spirits. She knew that man. Barry the Bulldozer O'Connell, one of the richest but also most repulsive men in the region. 3 times widowed, a notorious drinker, known for his cruelty to employees and animals. Zara did not understand why he was there, sitting in her house's study, conversing intimately with her father. Arthur stood up when he saw her enter and made a broad gesture with his hand. "Zara, my daughter, this is Barry O'Connell, our generous benefactor." The word benefactor sounded strange and forced in his mouth. Barry O'Connell struggled to his feet from the armchair, his heavy body moving slowly, and walked toward her with shuffling steps. His small, bloodshot eyes scanned her from head to toe, with an intensity that gave Zara a deep feeling of discomfort. Barry O'Connell began to circle her slowly, examining her like a buyer, evaluating cattle at the market. Zara remained paralyzed, feeling exposed and vulnerable, while that repulsive man inspected her from all angles. Penelope was leaning against the wall near the window, watching everything in silence, with a cold, neutral expression. "She's too thin for my liking," Barry O'Connell commented with a hoarse, drawn-out voice, completing a circle around her. "But she has wide, good hips. That's what matters. She'll give me strong, healthy children, many children." He laughed coarsely, a guttural, unpleasant sound that turned Zara's stomach. His words finally penetrated the young woman's confused mind, and the horrible comprehension began to form. "Father," Zara's voice came out trembling and sharp, laden with growing panic. "What do you mean, strong children? What is he talking about?" Arthur avoided looking at her directly, concentrating on imaginary smoothing the creases of his worn suit jacket. Barry O'Connell let out another cruel, alcoholic laugh. "You still haven't told her, Arthur. How inconsiderate of you toward your daughter." He turned to Zara with a twisted smile that revealed yellowed, rotting teeth. Arthur took a deep breath and finally spoke with a hard, emotionless voice. "I owe Barry O'Connell a considerable sum of money, Zara. Since I cannot pay that debt in cash, we have reached a mutually beneficial alternative agreement." He paused significantly. "You will marry Barry O'Connell tomorrow morning. That will settle our debt completely." Zara's world seemed to collapse in slow motion around her, like walls crumbling. Her legs buckled, and she had to lean on the nearby table to keep from falling. "No," she whispered first, then louder, with the desperation growing in her voice. "No, Father. Please don't do this. I don't want to marry him. Please." Tears began to stream down her cheeks as she pleaded, something she had sworn never to do. "I'll do anything. I'll work more. I'll eat less. But please don't force me into this." Barry O'Connell stepped forward and grabbed Zara's arm with brutal force, his thick fingers digging into her delicate flesh. "Stop the dramatics, girl. You should feel honored that a man with assets like mine accepts someone as insignificant as you." Zara tried to pull free, but the grip was too strong and caused her pain. "No, let me go. Father. Mother, please." She looked desperately at Penelope leaning against the wall, but her mother simply averted her gaze with a glacial indifference. "Enough with the theatrics," Arthur said coldly, gesturing toward Darcy, who was waiting in the hallway. "Darcy, help Barry O'Connell escort your sister to the vehicle. The sooner she leaves for his property, the sooner this is over." Darcy entered and grabbed Zara's other arm without ceremony. She began to scream and struggle desperately, as the two men forcibly dragged her out of the study, down the hallway, toward the main door where a black, sinister-looking luxury 4WD awaited them. Ethan was returning from the paddock on horseback, moving calmly along the side path, when he heard desperate screams coming from the front of the house. He immediately spurred the horse, galloped around the house, and reached the front yard. What he saw instantly made his blood boil. Zara was being forcibly dragged toward a vehicle by two men. She was screaming and struggling desperately, her feet dragging on the stone floor. "Gus!" Her cry ripped through the air when she saw him. "Gus, help me, please! I don't want to marry that man! Help me!" Her words were interrupted by desperate sobs. Ethan didn't think. He didn't hesitate for a single second. He dismounted the horse with an agile leap while the animal was still moving. "What is going on here?" Ethan roared with a voice of absolute command that no one there had ever heard in a simple laborer. Arthur turned, surprised by the interruption. "Don't interfere in this, Gus. Get back to your work immediately. This doesn't concern you." Ethan completely ignored the order and advanced with firm, determined steps to where Darcy and Barry O'Connell held Zara. "Let her go now." His voice was low, but charged with a dangerous authority and threat that made Barry O'Connell frown. "Who do you think you are, you miserable laborer? Get out of here before I call the local police." Ethan did not respond with words. He acted. With a quick, precise movement, he grabbed Darcy by the collar of his shirt and pushed him with brutal force that made him stagger and fall backward to the ground with a grunt of pain. Barry O'Connell released Zara to try to grab Ethan, but received an even stronger push to his fat chest that made him recoil and almost fall. Ethan took Zara by the waist in a fluid movement, lifted her easily, and placed her on the saddle of his stock horse in a single, coordinated gesture. Then he mounted behind her, surrounding her protectively with one arm, while taking the reins with his free hand. "You'll regret this, vagrant," Arthur shouted, his face red with fury and shock. "This is kidnapping. I'll call the authorities. You'll be hanged for this." Ethan looked at Arthur with green eyes that shone with a cold, controlled fury that promised terrible consequences. Then, without adding another word, he spurred the horse forcefully. The horse shot forward, kicking up dust and stones, galloping toward the open gates, with Zara safe in his arms. The horse galloped fast down the track as Ethan held Zara firmly against his chest, feeling her body tremble violently. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She barely breathed rapidly and irregularly, her fingers clutching his shirt desperately. With every mile traveled, the landscape changed. The poor, dry fields gave way to green, well-maintained land, new, painted fences. When they finally spotted the grand homestead on the horizon, Zara let out an incredulous gasp. The building was immense, majestic, with stone towers that seemed to touch the sky. Large windows shone with the light of the setting sun, and elaborate gardens stretched out like green, flowery carpets. Ethan felt her body tense even more as she realized where he was taking her. Confusion and shock completely took hold of her. They crossed the wrought iron gates, where the guards bowed deeply upon seeing him, calling him "Your Honor" with evident respect. Zara turned her head abruptly to look at him, her amber eyes wide with disbelief and something that looked like betrayal. Ethan stopped the horse at the main white marble steps, where servants were already gathering hastily, alerted by the unexpected arrival. He dismounted first, and then reached out his hands to help Zara down, but she visibly hesitated, looking at him as if she were seeing a complete stranger. She finally accepted his help reluctantly, descending from the horse with trembling legs that barely supported her. Her eyes scanned the imposing facade of the manor, the perfectly manicured gardens, the uniformed servants, trying to process the impossible reality unfolding before her. Before Ethan could say a single word of explanation, the large entrance doors opened, and an elegant woman, about 50 years old, quickly descended the stairs. "Mrs." Eleanor wore a navy blue silk dress, her gray hair pulled back in an impeccable bun, and her eyes, the same intense green as Ethan's, widened in surprise upon seeing her son covered in dust, holding an unknown young woman in a worn dress. "Ethan, what has happened?" she exclaimed, stopping in front of them, her voice laden with maternal concern and deep curiosity. She looked at Zara intently, noticing the dry tears on her cheeks, her red eyes, and the simple, worn dress that violently contrasted with the opulence of the surroundings. Ethan placed a protective hand on Zara's back, but she instinctively recoiled from the contact, and he felt that gesture like a stab. "Mother, this is Zara Blackwood," Ethan said with a firm voice, but charged with contained emotion. Observing Zara's face, which looked at him with a mixture of confusion, pain, and growing incredulity, The young woman I wrote to you about. I had to get her out of a terrible situation at her house. I will explain everything later. Mrs. Eleanor was a wise woman who understood that there was much more to the story than her son's few words revealed at that moment. She approached Zara with a kind, welcoming smile, extending both hands in a maternal gesture. Welcome, dear. You are safe here with us. Zara looked at the extended hands but did not take them. She let her arms hang at her sides, her gaze lost and distant. Ethan felt his chest painfully tighten upon seeing the distrust and shock reflected on her face. Ethan gestured to the housekeeper, a sturdy middle-aged woman named Mrs. Helen, who respectfully waited at the top of the stairs. Mrs. Helen, please prepare the blue room in the east wing and make Miss Zara comfortable. She will need a hot bath, clean clothes, and everything she requires. Then he turned to Zara, who looked at him with eyes that no longer seemed to recognize the kind Gus from the stockman's quarters. Zara, please go rest and refresh yourself. We will have dinner together in 2 hours, and I will explain absolutely everything. I promise. I know you are confused and possibly angry with me, but I only ask that you give me the chance to explain everything. His voice was charged with a vulnerability he rarely showed, almost a plea. Zara did not respond. Only nodded slightly, and followed Mrs. Helen in silence, ascending the marble stairs without looking back even once. As soon as Zara disappeared inside the manor, Mrs. Eleanor grabbed her son's arm and led him to her private study on the ground floor, closing the heavy door behind them. Explain it to me now, Ethan Caldwell, she said, with a firm but not accusatory voice, crossing her arms and looking at him with that maternal gaze that always managed to extract the truth from him since he was a child. What happened? Why did you bring that young woman here so abruptly? Ethan ran both hands through his longer Messier hair, finally letting the exhaustion and tension show on his face. I forcibly took her out of there. Mother in front of her father, her mother, everyone. Technically, I kidnapped her. His voice was low, almost ashamed. Mrs. Eleanor's eyes widened. You kidnapped that woman in front of her family, Ethan, for heaven's sake. What were you thinking? Ethan then told her everything. How he met Zara and fell in love with her genuine kindness, amidst her family's cruelty. He spoke of the mistreatment she suffered, Arthur's enormous debts, and finally, the horrible scene he witnessed that afternoon. Barry O'Connell, inspecting Zara like cattle, the father literally selling her to settle the debt, her being dragged forcibly toward a vehicle. She screamed, "My name, Mother." She screamed for help. I couldn't stand by and watch that. His voice cracked slightly at the end. Mrs. Eleanor remained silent for long moments, processing everything she had heard, and then she sighed deeply. Barry O'Connell, she murmured, with obvious disgust. I know that man well, cruel, violent, 3 wives dead under dubious circumstances. You did well to get her out of there, my son. She approached him and held Ethan's face with both hands, looking him in the eyes. She must mean a lot to you. 2 hours later, when the sun had completely set and the manor was illuminated by hundreds of candles and lanterns, Ethan waited nervously in the small private dining room. The table was elegantly set for 2 people with polished cutlery and sparkling crystal. Ethan had bathed, shaved, and changed clothes. He now wore dark trousers and a simple but fine white shirt, his still damp hair combed back. He was more nervous than he had ever been before any important corporate negotiation or official meeting. When the door opened and Mrs. Helen announced Zara's arrival, Ethan immediately stood up, his heart pounding. Zara entered slowly, now wearing a simple but pretty light blue cotton dress that Mrs. Helen had found. Her clean, loose brown hair fell in waves over her shoulders. She was beautiful, but her face remained closed, contained, and she carefully avoided his eyes. They ate in tense silence at first. Finally, when the main dishes were removed, Ethan took a deep breath and began. Zara, I need to tell you the whole truth from the beginning. My name is not Gus. It is Ethan Caldwell, owner of the Caldwell Group Holdings. He watched her face harden even more, if that was possible. I disguised myself as a poor laborer because I was tired of self-interested women who only wanted my wealth and status. I wanted to meet someone genuine, someone who saw me as a man and not as a magnate. I visited several properties disguised to observe the families without their social masks. When he arrived at her house and saw how they treated her, his voice intensified. I saw your kindness, your silent strength, your pure soul. Every conversation we had in the stockman's quarters was real, Zara. Every feeling I developed for you was genuine. Zara finally looked at him, and tears shone in her amber eyes, mixed with rage and pain. You lied to me, she said with a trembling but firm voice. All those nights, all those conversations, you pretended to be someone you weren't. How can I trust anything you said or did? Her voice rose slightly. The gift you gave me, the kind words, everything was part of an experiment, a game for a bored, wealthy man. Ethan abruptly stood up from his chair, rounded the table, and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. She tried to pull them away, but he held them with a gentle firmness. It wasn't a game, Zara. Everything I felt and feel for you is the most real thing in my life. Yes, I lied about my identity, and I deeply regret it, but my feelings, my admiration for you, my love that was never a lie. Zara looked at his hands holding hers, and then the tears finally overflowed, rolling freely down her cheeks. They broke the panel, she whispered, her voice choked with pain. My sisters came into my room in the morning, found the gift you made me, and Sky threw it on the floor. She broke it into pieces. They laughed at me and called me useless. Sobs began to shake her fragile shoulders. And my parents, my own parents, sold me, as if I were cattle, Ethan. They sold me to that horrible man without hesitation, without caring what I wanted, or felt the hatred they have for me, the hatred from my own family. She couldn't continue. The crying finally completely overcame her, years of pain and rejection, gushing out in hot, bitter tears. Ethan didn't hesitate for a second. He pulled her from the chair and enveloped her completely in his arms. Zara resisted for only an instant before collapsing against his chest, crying desperately with her fists clinging to his shirt as she finally allowed all the repressed pain of years of mistreatment to escape. Ethan held her tightly, one hand stroking her hair and the other firm on her back, murmuring soft words against the crown of her head. It's over, Zara. All of that is over. You are safe here with me, I promise. His voice was hoarse with emotion. No one will ever mistreat you again. No one will sell you. No one will break your gifts or your dreams. You are under my protection now, and I would give my life before allowing anyone to hurt you again. They remained like that for long minutes, until Zara's sobs finally diminished and transformed into trembling sighs. Ethan gently pulled back just enough to be able to look her in the swollen red eyes, using his thumbs to wipe away the tears that still fell. Zara, look at me, he asked softly. When her eyes finally met his green ones, Ethan continued with a voice charged with intense emotion. I love you. Two souls that recognized each other in the midst of chaos. You saw me like no other woman has ever seen me. You talked to me like no other did. You made me feel human again. He took one of her hands and gently kissed her calloused fingers. Marry me. Zara, not out of obligation, not out of gratitude, but because I believe you also feel something for me, and because you deserve to be loved and cared for. Zara looked at him for long seconds that seemed like an eternity, her gaze tracing every detail of his face, those intense green eyes that always made her feel seen, that firm chin, those lips that now smiled with excitement, waiting for her answer. She thought about everything that had happened, the lies, but also the truths, the humble Gus and the brave Ethan who had saved her. You saved me today, she finally whispered, not only from the forced marriage, but from a whole lifetime of invisibility and rejection. You saw me, Ethan. You listened to me. You made me feel important. More tears fell, but now they were different, lighter. Yes, she said with a firm voice despite the tears. Yes, I will marry you because I loved Gus in the stockman's quarters, and I love Ethan now. You are the same person, the same kind heart. A smile finally illuminated her soaked face. Ethan let out a sound between a laugh and a sob, of pure relief and happiness, pulling her back into his arms and spinning her in the air, making her laugh for the first time on that terrible and wonderful night. When he finally set her down on the floor, their faces were centimeters apart. Breaths mingling, hearts beating at the same accelerated rhythm. Ethan looked into her eyes, asking for permission in silence, and when Zara nodded slightly, he finally closed the distance and kissed her. It was a slow, deep kiss, laden with promises, relief, and love. Lips moving softly, discovering and memorizing each other. Ethan's hands sank into her hair. Zara's clung to his shirt, and the world around them simply ceased to exist. When they finally separated, both were breathless, with wide smiles lighting up their faces. I will make you happy every day for the rest of our lives, Ethan promised against her lips. I promise. Mrs. Eleanor hired a veritable commission of organizers, seamstresses, florists, and decorators to prepare the magnate's wedding in record time. The news spread throughout the region like fire through dry scrub. The wealthy landowner, Ethan Caldwell, would finally marry after years of rejecting suitors. Invitations on imported paper with gold lettering were sent to all the prominent grazing families in the region, including, ironically, The Blackwood family. Penelope held the luxurious envelope with trembling hands, reading and rereading the elegant words. "I can't believe it," she muttered incredulously, looking at Arthur. "The magnate wasn't sick, as he reported. How is it possible that he is going to marry now, so suddenly?" Arthur threw the invitation onto the table with a brusque gesture, his face hardened by more urgent concerns. "Penelope, we have bigger problems. Barry O'Connell sent another notice today saying he won't wait any longer." His voice was hard and definitive, like a death sentence. "It will have to be Sky or Chloe. One of them will have to marry him to settle our debt." Penelope pallid, bringing her hand to her chest dramatically. "I said it, and I repeat it. I will not hand over my daughters to that repulsive old man. They deserve young, rich socialites." Her voice rose hysterically, her eyes shining with impotent rage. Arthur abruptly stood up from his chair and approached his wife with a somber expression. "And what do you propose we do then? Tell me." "The creditors will come and take everything if we don't pay." His voice resonated in the study like thunder. Penelope remained silent for long moments, her mind working feverishly. "We will go to the magnate's wedding," she suddenly said, grabbing Arthur's arm. "All the wealthy, single elite will be there. We prepare Sky and Chloe impeccably and find a rich husband for one of them." Her plan sounded desperate, even to herself, but it was the last hope they had. Arthur looked at his wife for long seconds, then slammed his fist on the table so hard that the inkwell and papers jumped. "Very well, we will go to the wedding and play this last card. But did you hear well what I'm going to say now?" He pointed at her face with a trembling finger. "If they don't manage to get a rich husband at the wedding, one of them will marry Barry O'Connell the following week." His voice left no room for discussion or emotional plea. Penelope slowly nodded, swallowing hard, knowing there were no more ways out or possible excuses. In the following days, they prepared Sky and Chloe, spending their last resources on expensive dresses and borrowed jewelry. The wedding day dawned glorious, with a cloudless blue sky and a radiant sun that seemed to bless the union. The Caldwell homestead was transformed into a true fairy tale. Thousands of white and gold flowers decorated every column and every window. The private chapel was dazzling, with polished wooden pews covered in red velvet and fragrant candles lit. Luxury vehicles began to arrive, dropping off graziers, CEOs, property developers, and their impeccably dressed families. The Blackwood family arrived in a borrowed, worn vehicle. Sky and Chloe descended in their best dresses, looking around with eyes full of envy at the ostentatious opulence. When all the guests were seated, and the chapel full, the orchestra began to play the solemn bridal march. All heads turned toward the main entrance. The large oak doors opened slowly, and the bride began her majestic entrance down the red carpet. She wore an absolutely dazzling dress, pure white silk with silver thread embroidery and a long train that flowed as she advanced. A thick lace veil completely covered her face, making any identification impossible. At the altar, Ethan Caldwell waited, unrecognizable, his hair perfectly cut, his beard shaved, revealing his strong chin and an impeccable ceremonial suit. When the bride reached the altar, Ethan extended his hand, which she took with trembling fingers visible through the white gloves. The priest began the ceremony with a solemn voice that resonated through the ancient walls of the chapel. Everyone awaited with expectation the moment the veil would be lifted and the bride's identity revealed. Ethan stepped forward and with gentle hands slowly lifted the delicate fabric. Zara's face was revealed little by little, her amber eyes shining with happiness. A collective gasp swept through the chapel. No one knew that simple but surprisingly beautiful young woman. But in a corner of the chapel, Chloe strongly elbowed her mother's arm, making Penelope let out a muffled cry. "Mother, father, look closely at who it is," Chloe hissed, pointing to the altar. "It's her. It's Zara. Our Zara is there dressed as a bride." Penelope and Arthur turned their heads so abruptly they almost hurt their necks, recognizing the daughter they had sold. "And the magnate, look at him without a beard and with short hair." "It's him, it's Gus," Chloe continued, trembling. "Ethan Caldwell was the Gus who worked in our stables. The poor laborer was the richest man in the region." I knew his face was familiar. The revelation fell on them like tons of bricks, crushing them with the weight of comprehension. Arthur went pale, his face turning from white to red and then purple as he processed the impossible information. Without thinking of the consequences, he abruptly stood up, making noise, and began to advance down the aisle toward the altar. "Mr. Caldwell, Your Honor," he shouted with a voice that was too loud, causing the orchestra to stop and all the guests to turn in horror. "Why didn't you tell us who you were? You would have been treated with respect. There has been a misunderstanding." He tried to smile, but the expression was pathetic. "And regarding the marriage to my daughter, I did not formally authorize this union." His voice faded as he saw the icy expression on the magnate's face, who slowly turned to confront him. Ethan looked at Arthur with a coldness and contempt so intense they made the man step back. "Mr. Blackwood, you lost any right to an opinion on Zara's life the moment you sold her like cattle to pay your shameful debts," Ethan said in a low voice that propagated throughout the chapel. "The moment you allowed her to be mistreated, humiliated, and rejected for 19 years. Murmurs of shock ran through the guests. As for your authorization, it is neither necessary nor desired. Zara is of age and makes her own decisions." 4 security guards approached silently. "Withdraw immediately before I order you to be forcibly removed from this property. You have 5 minutes to leave these lands." Arthur tried to protest, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but before he could articulate a word, 4 uniformed guards positioned themselves behind him. "Please, sir, accompany us," one said with polite firmness, allowing no refusal. Arthur was escorted back, along with Penelope, Skye, Chloe, and Darcy, all mortified with shame under the judging gaze of the entire regional elite, and they were expelled from the wedding. The priest continued the ceremony with a voice that tried to maintain solemnity. "Ethan Caldwell, do you accept Zara Blackwood as your lawful wife? To love and respect her until death do you part?" Ethan looked deeply into Zara's amber eyes, a genuine smile illuminating his face. "Yes, I do," he replied with a firm, clear voice. "Zara Blackwood, do you accept Ethan Caldwell as your lawful husband?" Zara smiled through tears, squeezing Ethan's hands tightly. "Yes, I do," she replied with absolute certainty. "Then I declare you husband and wife," proclaimed the priest. "You may kiss the bride." Ethan drew Zara into his arms and kissed her deeply before everyone, showing that she was loved, desired, and chosen forever. The reception was held in the immense gardens of the Caldwell homestead, under white silk marquees decorated with thousands of fragrant flowers. Tables covered with fine linen cloths overflowed with exotic foods, rare wines, and elaborate 6-tier cakes. An orchestra played cheerful waltzes as the guests danced, laughed, and toasted the newlyweds. Ethan did not let go of Zara's hand for a single second, proudly introducing her to every property owner, CEO, and land baron as my wife, Zara Caldwell. She was radiant, her face illuminated by a happiness so pure that even the most cynical elite felt their hearts warm. Mrs. Eleanor embraced her daughter-in-law for a long time and whispered in her ear, "Welcome to the family, my dear child. You have brought life back to my son's eyes." Zara cried again, this time in the arms of a true mother, feeling genuine maternal love for the first time. The Blackwood family was escorted out just as promised, and in the silent vehicle ride back, Arthur finally verbalized the inevitable, looking at his daughters. "One of you two will marry Barry O'Connell next week." When night finally fell over the manor, and the last guests departed after hours of intense celebration, Ethan led Zara by the hand through the candlelit corridors to the main suite. The carved mahogany door opened, revealing an immense room, decorated in gold and ivory tones. An enormous bed with a silk canopy, soft Persian rugs, fresh flowers in crystal vases, and a crackling fireplace filled the atmosphere with a warm, comforting light. Zara stopped at the entrance, still processing that all this was real, that she had really married Ethan, that she was now Mrs. Caldwell, and that manor was her home. Ethan gently pulled her inside, closed the door behind them, and finally, they were completely alone for the first time as husband and wife. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly, stroking her face with gentle fingers. Zara shook her head, smiling. "No, not when I'm with you." Then he kissed her again, this time more deeply, and lifted her into his arms, carrying her to the bed, where they would spend their first night of love. Finally united not only in spirit but also in body, sealing the promise made before God and men to belong to each other forever. 6 months had passed since that magical wedding day, and the sun began to set on the horizon, staining the sky orange, pink, and violet. Zara was sitting on the soft golden sand, her bare feet being caressed by the gentle incoming and outgoing waves. She wore a light white cotton dress that floated in the sea breeze and delicately caressed her already rounded, 4-month pregnant belly. Ethan sat behind her, surrounding her with his protective arms, his chin resting on her shoulder, as they both contemplated in reverent silence the sea she had dreamed of seeing all her life. "You brought me to the sea," Zara whispered, her voice choked with emotion, tears of happiness shining in her amber eyes as she watched the endless waves stretch out as far as the eye could see. Ethan gently kissed the side of her neck, pulling her a little closer against his chest, careful not to press the belly where their child was growing. "I promised I would bring you, didn't I? And I always keep my promises to you." His voice was hoarse with deep emotion as one of his hands descended to caress her rounded belly. "You saved me, Zara. You saved me from a life of falsehood and emptiness, from arranged marriages without love, from never knowing what it was like to be truly loved." He gently turned her face to look her in the eyes. "I love you more than all the words in the world could express, more than all the wealth I possess." Zara smiled through tears, placing her hand over his that rested on her belly. "And I love you, Ethan. You gave me everything I never had. Love, respect, dignity, a true family, and now this child of ours." "Mick told me some things," Ethan commented after a few minutes of contemplative silence. "He went to the Blackwood property to buy your father's 9 horses. I couldn't leave those animals there." Zara nodded, remembering the mistreated horses Ethan had cared for with so much affection. "Now they are in our stables, well-fed, healthy, and happy." Ethan took a deep breath before continuing. "Mick also told me what happened with your family." The hesitation in his voice was clear. "Chloe married Barry O'Connell 3 weeks after our wedding." His voice was neutral, but Zara felt a slight tremor in his body. Ethan hugged her harder, comforting her, even knowing that the news didn't affect her as expected. Mick also said that Barry O'Connell treats her like property, as expected of a man of such cruel nature. He paused. "Darcy was arrested 2 months ago for accumulated gambling debts he couldn't pay, and for physically assaulting a creditor who confronted him in a pub." Zara nodded slowly, processing the information without feeling sadness or joy, only a kind of distant emptiness. "And Sky?" she asked, although she already knew the answer. "Sky now works as a domestic maid in her own house," Ethan replied. With Darcy in prison, Chloe married, and all the fortune lost to the creditors, she had no choice but to clean the house for her mother. Life's irony is sometimes cruel. Zara remained silent for long minutes, listening only to the rhythmic sound of the waves breaking on the sand and feeling the warmth of Ethan's body enveloping her protectively. "I should feel something for them. Pity, rage, satisfaction, some emotion," she finally murmured with a low, reflective voice. "But in telling me everything, I feel nothing. A complete emptiness, where there should be emotion." She turned slightly to look Ethan in the eyes. "I don't see them as family, Ethan. I never have and never will, even though we share blood. Family is not who gives you life, and then spends 19 years wishing you didn't exist." Her voice became firmer and more confident. "Family is who chooses to love you every day, who makes you feel that you matter, that you are seen and valued. My family is here beside me now," Zara continued, placing her hand over Ethan's, which rested on her belly. "You, Ethan, who risked everything to save me from a life of invisibility and pain, who taught me what it is to be truly loved and not just tolerated." Her tears ran freely now, moistening her cheeks, rosy from the sea wind. "Our child here in my womb, whom I already love more than anything in the world, even though I haven't seen his little face." She smiled through tears. "And Mrs. Eleanor, who welcomed me with open arms without knowing me, who treats me like a daughter with genuine affection and true pride." Ethan felt his own eyes fill with tears upon hearing those words laden with deep truth and pure emotion. "You are the strongest woman I have ever known," Ethan said with a choked voice, fully turning Zara in his arms to face him, sitting on the sand. "You went through so much suffering, so much rejection and cruelty, and yet your heart remained pure, gentle, and capable of loving." He took her face between his hands with infinite tenderness. "You taught me what true love is, Zara. You taught me that status and fortune mean nothing if there isn't someone with whom to genuinely share life." Their foreheads touched, their breaths mingling. "I promise to spend every day for the rest of my life making you happy, showing you how precious and loved you are." He placed his hand on her belly alongside hers. "I promise that our child will grow up knowing he is wanted, loved, and valued every day of his life." Zara smiled through tears and pulled Ethan into a deep, passionate kiss, while the sea waves caressed their feet and the sun set gloriously on the golden horizon. When they separated, both smiled with that serene, complete happiness that only exists when one is exactly where they should be. "Thank you for bringing me to the sea," she whispered against his lips. "Thank you for saving me from that life. Thank you for loving me." Ethan kissed her forehead with devotion. "Thank you for letting me love you, for accepting this wealthy magnate disguised as a poor laborer who fell madly in love with the most extraordinary woman he ever met." They remained there sitting, embraced on the sand, watching the sun completely disappear as the first stars began to shine in the dark sky. Two hearts that met in the midst of chaos and chose to build a future of true love together. They stayed on the beach until the full moon appeared brightly in the starry sky, illuminating the waves with a silver, magical light. Ethan helped Zara stand up carefully, wiping the sand from her dress, and they walked slowly hand in hand along the seashore, leaving footprints in the wet sand that the waves gently washed away. When they finally returned to the vehicle waiting for them on the nearby track, Zara looked back one last time to etch that vision of the sea under the moonlight into her memory. The impossible dream that had come true, thanks to the man walking by her side, transforming every impossibility into possibility. Ethan noticed her gaze and whispered in her ear, "We will return as many times as you want, my love. The sea will always be here waiting for you, just as I will always be." Zara smiled, placing her hand on her belly, where their child was growing safe and loved, and felt a deep peace flood her heart. The past of pain was behind them, buried in the sands of time. The future shone brightly ahead of them, a future of true love, genuine family, and deserved happiness. And as the vehicle took them back to the manor, which was now their true home, Zara knew with absolute certainty that she had finally found her place in the world, in the arms of the man who loved her unconditionally. If you reach the end of this story, tell us in the comments what most moved you on Zara and Ethan's journey. Every heart that connects with this story of overcoming adversity, true love, and new beginnings is a gift to us. Zara teaches us that it is never too late to be seen, valued, and loved as we deserve. She shows us that even when we are treated as if we are worthless by our own family, we can rise with dignity when we find someone who truly sees our value. And Ethan teaches us that true love does not see status, possessions, or social position. It sees the heart, the soul, the pure essence of who we are. He shows us that sometimes we need to take off our masks and disguises to find someone who loves us for the truth we carry inside. This is a story about being seen when you have been invisible all your life, about how a rejected soul can flourish when it finally receives the love it always deserved, about how true love does not appear at perfect balls or in silk dresses, but in humble stables, sincere conversations under the moon, and gifts carved by hand with care. If you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now, so you don't miss any story full of love, emotion, overcoming adversity, and endings that warm the soul. Leave your like if this story touched your heart, and share it with someone who needs to believe that they deserve to be truly loved. Until the next story.